Welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast, now part of the Work Defined Podcast Network. Join us as we explore the vital role of compensation, strategy, data, and people analytics in navigating today's complex business world. With the resources of Work Defined, we're now bringing you deeper insights and actionable ideas from top experts. Now, here is your host, David Turetsky. Hello and welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast. I am your host, David Turetsky, and I have with me one of my bestest buddies from, I'm not going to say how long ago because it'll age both of us, but Dara Brenner from Employ.
Hello,
Dara,
David.
how are you?
Well, how are you?
Good. Dara and I had worked together, and it's one of those things where you've worked together and you have this appreciation for this person. She does really good stuff. She's like a person you look up to, a person you want to be like. And then she does so well in her career and you follow her all the time and you're proud of her. I mean, I used to be, every time I saw something on LinkedIn, I was proud of you. And that was really cool. And I really appreciate you being on the HR Data Labs podcast.
Well, you are very, very sweet, and in some cases way too sweet, but I do appreciate it. And the feeling is incredibly mutual. So the idea that I got the opportunity to be on a podcast with you was awesome.
Thank you. Well, why don't you tell, now that I gave you such this glowing setup, why don't you tell people a little bit about you and a little bit about Employ?
I've been working with Employ for almost 2 years now. Employ is a hiring technology company. We have brands such as JobVite, Lever, and Jazz, and we are really focused on reimagining what talent acquisition and hiring technology is about as we go into 2026 and beyond.
Cool.
In terms of my career to get here, I've been in the HR technology space I'm only going to say 25 plus years, because anything longer, like you said, would definitely age us.
Exactly.
But during that time, I've worked at companies such as ADP, Ultimate Software, UKG, also some smaller companies, startups, and have had the opportunity to really work across the entire employee lifecycle, but have found myself back to talent acquisition, which is by far my favorite of all aspects of the employee lifecycle.
It's so funny how throughout our careers, we go elsewhere, but we always seem to we go back to what we love the most because it's our passion.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think, I won't say that I don't love all the other aspects.
Sure.
I love payroll, I love benefits, I love talent management and all those things. But I think what's really interesting is being in a company or in a part of the industry where we're helping people get jobs. And that's
very laudable.
Yeah, it is. It's really exciting. And I think, the world is different now than it was 20 years ago, and 10 years ago, than 5 years ago. Honestly, probably different than 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And so that's what's really exciting about the industry that we, again.
And we're going to talk about that. But before we do, what's one fun thing that no one knows about Dara?
So there are a few people out there that know this, but the bulk of people don't know this. I was a successful restaurateur.
Wow.
Now, I say that a little bit tongue-in-cheek only because I was more of the silent partner, but way back when I first moved to Atlanta, I met a couple of really cool people, and they always wanted to be in the restaurant business, bar/restaurant business.
Sure.
And I was like, well, that sounds really cool, because we were all single at the time and we were all going to bars. And so we were like, wow, the idea of going into our own bar was like going to Cheers and having everybody know your name. And
exactly.
And so we got into it, and it was a place called Front Page News in Atlanta, Georgia. It was in the first location was in Midtown. We opened just in time for the Olympics back in 1996.
Oh, that's cool. Wow.
And then we opened a second location in 2003 in a different area of town called Little Five Points. And we had a good 25-year run, and it was fun. It was really fun. And during that time, the three people who were a part of it that did this primarily because it'd be fun to own a bar, got married, had kids. The kids grew up in the bar restaurant. But we had this opportunity to share it with everybody else in our lives, and it was really just an incredibly fun time. And I learned a ton, because I never growing up did I think, boy, do I really want to be part of a restaurant. And so it was super interesting.
That's so cool. Yeah. There's some, I guess you could say, well, a lot of us grew up watching Cheers, and a lot of us grew up watching a lot of sitcoms that were around, um, you know, restaurants. And there's so much mystique around it. And it just seems like such a cool thing.
Yeah, I mean, as my partners would say, because I was doing the HR technology thing while they were actually doing the
Of
day-to-day
course.
thing.
Yeah.
They would say that Mystique was probably more just grit, determination, and
Yeah.
super hard work, but it was, uh, it was fun to see kind of the goings on back behind the scenes
Right.
and all of that type of stuff, which is a very different experience than what you're seeing in front of the
Of
scenes
course.
with all the folks having a good time and drinking and eating and listening to music and so on and so forth. But it was an experience that has definitely shaped who I am today.
That's great. Well, and Dara, there's one other thing we wanted to talk about, which is not as fun, but very impactful, not just to you, but to other people, based on some recent events in your life that were not so positive. You actually are creating a foundation based on your husband and what happened with him. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I appreciate the forum, David. So my husband, a little less than a month ago, actually passed away from an absolutely terrible disease, glioblastoma. Most people associate that with John McCain and Kennedy, but it's a awful disease with absolutely no cure. And we were incredibly fortunate because my husband was just an absolute warrior, and he took what is a 6, maybe 12-month prognosis to about 3 years, which was incredible and incredibly impactful for my boys to see the strength that he had going through all of that.
Right.
But part of that was our ability to go wherever we needed to go and to do whatever we needed to do to try and help him on this journey. And so, as a part of that, what my 2 sons wanted to do in honor of their dad is to create a fund at our local, hospital here in Atlanta. It's Piedmont Healthcare,
Yep.
but specifically the brain tumor clinic itself, and they wanted the fund to be for brain tumor patient assistance. So for those who don't have the financial wherewithal,
Right.
don't have the resources to go and do all the things that we did, but are stricken with this absolutely incredibly awful disease, they would have the resources, at least through donations, to be able to fight the good fight just as we did, as we hope and pray and
Yeah.
wait for a cure for this awful disease.
And we're going to put the link to that foundation. Anybody, please, if you have anything, any money will be helpful. Please donate. It's an incredibly impactful cause. We both know another person that's near and dear to us, Tony Marzulli, who lost his wife from glioblastoma. I watched Tony go through it as well, and it was awful. So please, if you can, please give.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Thank you for that. But on to our topic for today. And this is one that I think a lot of us we've heard about it. We've watched it on LinkedIn. We've watched it in the news. We just can't believe it's actually happening, Dara. In the age of AI, there needs to be established trust because there actually is candidate fraud. And what we need to do as employers to prepare ourselves for this. And we're going to get into that in just a moment.
Get ready to turn up the volume on your HR game. I'm Jay Arnold, former musician turned HR leader and host of Backstage Pass, the HR Rockstar. Each episode pulls back the curtain on key HR topics, from leadership lessons and bold career pivots to the latest in HR tech and talent strategies, featuring the rock stars within their industries. If you're ready to shake up the status quo and amplify your impact, this is your all-access pass. You can catch the show on the Work Defined Podcast Network and wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe now and let's rock the future of work together.
So, Dara, let's dive into this. This is going to be a really fun one because we talk about artificial intelligence all the time, about how it makes the hiring process easier, especially in the volume business that hiring has become these days. But we haven't really talked about candidate fraud. We've actually even seen that some organizations actually put out profiles just to actually just put them out there to do some research. Why don't we talk about what can talent leaders do to kind of balance this innovation with trust? Where do we start with this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a year ago, all anyone wanted to talk about was AI and talent
Right.
acquisition. But in the last, call it 9 months or so, all anybody wants to talk about is combating candidate fraud.
Mm,
And to your point, I think AI has provided the opportunity to be more efficient, both for the candidate and the talent acquisition professional. But it's also rife with opportunity to do things nefarious. And so, I think, from my perspective, what talent acquisition professionals need to think about is that candidate fraud is not just a single event. It's not just a fraudulent resume that was created via AI to
right.
specifically match a job description or a job posting. That's one aspect of it, and
Sure.
certainly trying to cut through that noise is important. And they should make sure that their talent acquisition vendors can do that as a baseline. Identification verification is another piece
Right.
to it. Is the person that has applied for said role, are they really who they say that they are?
Right.
And so that's another layer of it. But if you go deeper, there's even deeper pieces all the way to the interview process
Mm.
where folks are either showing up with deep fakes. So the person you're talking to may not be the person you're really talking
Really?
to. Yeah, interestingly enough, or we even have an experience ourselves with a candidate who was running two different laptops when they were doing the interview, and one was listening for the question being asked and spitting out the appropriate answer
You were
so
cheating.
that the candidate could actually read it. And
No.
so, the way we view it is that candidate fraud, combating candidate fraud is almost like layers of Swiss cheese.
Yeah.
So every layer that you put on there, so you think about like helping screeners get through fraudulent or misrepresented resumes is one layer, but there's still holes in it. Getting through the identification verification is another layer, but when you put the 2 layers on
Yeah.
top of each other, the holes get smaller.
Right.
Combating deepfakes in the interview process, as an example, is another layer. So you put another layer of fraud detection on it, and the holes get even smaller. And so for us, what we're looking to do is really focus on figuring out where all of those different potential fraudulent opportunities are across the entire recruiting funnel and
Yeah.
making sure that we're layering detection across the entire funnel to make those holes smaller and smaller and smaller. Do I think they'll ever be gone, David? I don't know, because once you create a better mousetrap, you wind up with smarter mice.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and for that end, I think all of us had heard those horror stories of the North Korean workers who were working through an agent in the US who had a farm of laptops in her den or wherever. And she was actually kind of managing all of these different people who were kind of fake working through the US, but were working from North Korea.
Right.
Are we talking about that, or are we talking about something? I mean, because you mentioned there were different levels of this, right?
Mhm.
There's I put my resume through ChatGPT and it just, enhanced my resume a little bit versus, someone really lying about who they are. You mentioned a lot of that, but it's not the extreme case like the North Korea, but it could be, right?
Absolutely can be. I mean, we have an example of a customer who actually hired a North Korean asset.
Wow.
And so, that's what really, and this was a while ago. This was probably about 9 or 12 months ago, and that's when we started investigating. And the problem is most people sit there and go, "Well, if you're really hiring a North Korean asset, how much damage can they do?" Well, this was for a customer support position, and so luckily they determined it prior to the person
Yeah.
getting access to their Salesforce instance.
Right.
So it
Yeah.
can be incredibly damaging. I mean, it's incredible the amount of damage that some of these folks can do. Now, to your point, do I really believe that somebody providing a fraudulent resume is going to cause significant amounts of damage? Potentially not, but I can tell you, and I'm just looking at some of my stats right now, I can tell you that just resume fraud itself, there's studies out there that said there's $600 billion would be the estimated cost to US businesses from resume fraud. And the way
Wow.
that breaks down, David, is that again, I think this particular research study said that it's about $28,000 on average financial loss per fraud incident for a company. So if you think
Yeah.
about 28,000 per fraud incident,
Yeah.
and then you magnify that, you can see where
Oh,
that
sure.
600 billion is not off the rails.
And this is one of those things where, we always worry about hiring the wrong person. We always worry about hiring a bad performer. Or, there's so much in trust that you have to have bringing a candidate in. The last thing you're thinking about is, first of all, they aren't where they say they are, but also that there's something nefarious behind it. It boggles your mind how we're getting to a stage of our organizations where it's not even just that someone's lying. they're
Yeah.
they're trying to do harm. That's
Yeah.
just wild.
Yeah, it is well, and I think what's really interesting is, and you've got to be careful, right? Because you also, as a talent acquisition professional, you want to be careful because of
Right.
the potential financial impact to your business. But the other side to it is, if you get too draconian, then what you're doing is you're limiting your talent pool.
Absolutely.
Right? And so it's not like you wanna start asking for biometric data when somebody applies, because if you do, well, now all of a sudden, I mean, I can tell you I'm not gonna give my biometric
Right.
data when I first apply
Right.
to a company.
Right.
I mean, it's questionable
Blood
whether I'm willing.
sample or a
Yeah, I mean,
fingerprint or
once you provide me a job offer, maybe I'll think about it, but I'm certainly not gonna give
wow.
it to you at the very beginning of time to validate who I am.
Well, and there are certain roles. I mean, all kidding aside, there are certain roles where you have to, right? When you're
100%.
doing government clearance and security clearances and DOD or DOW, whatever they want to be called today. There's a lot of that and I worked at Morgan Stanley and Bankers Trust, and we had to go through the FBI checks.
Yep.
So there's that. And you assent, you give affirmation to do that.
Right.
But, working at McDonald's, or no, but seriously, right?
True.
Working at McDonald's, no one's going to say, right, yeah, I'm going to give a blood sample.
Right.
Or I'm going to give my fingerprint or my retinal scan, even though they may have sensitive information about recipes or profitability or, ascending to becoming a manager or an assistant manager. They may actually get some really interesting, well, a key holder, but they might get some really interesting stuff. So maybe that day will come.
Yeah, I think it might, but I think the way we think about it is the deeper you get into the recruiting funnel, the more risk there is to your organization.
Sure.
Right? And so the tighter the control should be. So when you're really kind of talking about the resume, the application at the very beginning, you want to be able to have a lighter touch in terms of your fraud detection, because you don't want to marginalize folks whose, let's say, their specific pronouns don't necessarily match their ID, that type of stuff. And so you want to have a lighter touch. As you get deeper into the recruiting cycle, I think at that point you understand a lot more about the role to which you are hiring for, and you can make sure that your fraud detection techniques are a little bit more stringent because of the risk associated with it. I think that's the key, is you've got to find that right balance
Absolutely.
across the funnel, because at the end of the day, if every single in the US, if every single application I've got to provide my social security number, one, I'm not going to feel very comfortable doing it, because then the bad guys are just going to have fake job
Sure.
descriptions and job applications on the internet, which they already are.
Yeah. Yes.
But I'm also not going to provide it because I'm not comfortable doing it. But as I get further in, and as I know the company more and I understand more about the company and we have a relationship, I'm more apt to give a little bit more. And so that's the delicate
Right.
balance that vendors have to be able to achieve.
But we've also seen, I think you and I have both seen, that because of the security or lack thereof, or some of the incidents that have happened,
Mhm.
whether it's through our social security numbers getting on the dark web, through, breaches from insurance companies, or healthcare companies or credit agencies or whatever, we've given this information out so much that it's kind of like the stuff's already there. And, I mean, even when you go to Facebook and you click on an ad and you don't realize it's tracking you really, really deeply.
Yeah.
I think we've all become a little bit numb to this at this point, right? I mean, giving up that information. And yes, a lot of people don't want to, but especially when you're trying to get a job and you're desperate, is that really going to prevent you from doing that?
Potentially not in this particular economy, I would agree with you, but I think that's where the responsibility is on the employer,
Yeah,
right? Because it's too easy, and we've seen this as well. It's too easy for the bad guys to throw up fake job
sure.
postings
Yeah,
with your logo on it.
yeah,
And so I think there's got to be that balance, and the employer has to really think about it and say, how important is this thing right now in this particular moment in time? Because I also don't want to necessarily have my brand associated with the collection of something
right.
that causes folks' Social Security numbers or what have you to be on the dark web.
And by the way, those phishing attempts have gotten so good
Yep.
that even myself or maybe even you, we look at it and we go, "That's good.
Yeah.
That's real good." And, you kinda go, "Yeah, of course, I'm never gonna click on that," especially if it's coming from an email, but wow, they've gotten sophisticated.
Yeah, and it's interesting because if you think about it, talent acquisition historically hasn't been as concerned about these type of things as a payroll
Of
company,
course not.
right? And so this is the first time where we really, really are under a microscope in terms of how we handle this because, it just doesn't carry the same level because you don't typically, until you're doing a background check,
Right.
provide a Social Security number. It's never really asked, but obviously in the payroll space, it is.
Of course, of course.
It's an interesting time for talent acquisition.
And on that basis, let's go to question 2 because I actually think this is kind of neat. We're seeing a lot more data showing increases in the AI generated resume space, especially with, the really cool stuff that ChatGPT or Perplexity does. There's also you talked about the coaching tools that exist and the deep fakes.
Yeah.
What well, I mean, we've talked about data governance in the past, but what does strong governance actually look like for hiring teams trying to stay compliant and protect against those issues when they're dealing with these candidate trust issues?
Yeah, so I think there's really kind of two aspects to it. So we talked a good amount about fraud detection
Yep.
and making sure that your fraud detection is layered. Again, I love the Swiss cheese analogy
Yeah, sure.
because it does, the holes do get smaller as you
Right.
layer more and more on.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. And I think making sure you're managing through candidate trust as a part of that is really important. So again, don't overflex in the earlier part of the funnel. I think the other piece that's super important, and I'm super proud of us at Employ, for partnering up with IBM because IBM has been in this space longer than anyone has. I
Yeah.
mean, I can't remember exactly what year Watson was on Jeopardy, but it was a long, long
Yeah.
time ago.
Very long time ago.
Exactly, and so they've been doing it a really long time, and they tend to be more conservative.
Yeah.
They tend to be a little bit slower moving to be more conservative, but guess what? In governance, I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
And so what we've done is we've actually all of our AI, all of it, including the candidate fraud detection and everything, is all wrapped in a layer of IBM Watson X governance.
Mm.
And what it does for us is it provides us with transparency and explainability always. 24/7, 365. And so I'll give you one more analogy because, as you can tell with the Swiss cheese thing, I love
You love
analogies.
that, yeah.
But I think about when you take your child to the doctor for their wellness visit, and the doctor says, "Clean bill of health," and it's great, but it's really only telling you what the last year meant,
Right.
right? It doesn't tell you what's gonna happen tomorrow, and so these audits that whether they're once a year, twice a year, quarterly, are really only telling you that you were good for the last quarter, the last
Right.
half a year. What this does is because it's always on, it's always looking for bias, it's always looking for hallucination in your AI models, and therefore it's keeping you safe constantly. It's almost like having a doctor in your house with your child wired up constantly, and you can say, "Is my child still good, doc? Is my child still good, doc?" And the answer is always yes.
Yeah, but in that case, that's helicoptering.
is a
to
little bit
another
healthy.
level. Whereas what you're talking about is making sure that your compliance on processes is constantly updated and constantly, and for a lot of us, we're thinking about, well, there's new rules in the EU and there's rules that are ever evolving across the United States. And then there's the obviously the eightfold scoring with FCRA, could have been taken care of if they may have just done some documentation or some alert. Does that necessarily scare you, those things that are constantly evolving and keeping people on the razor's edge with compliance issues?
Percent. I mean, if it didn't scare me, then people should be worried,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
To me, I think every time I see something like that, and I don't throw stones
Right,
because you never know when it's you.
right,
But I think I probably go to bed every night thinking about, are we doing the right thing for our customers? Do we have the most compliant, do we have the most safe environment, the most responsible environment for what we're doing with AI? Because, like I said at the beginning, AI has been an absolute godsend from an efficiency perspective and from a productivity perspective. But if it's not governed in the right way, there's always somebody out there that is trying to do something nefarious, or it in and of itself isn't smart enough to make sure it's not doing something wrong. And I'm constantly afraid, David, but
yeah.
I think that's what makes being in HR technology so fun right now, because there's nothing boring about it.
Well, no, there's definitely nothing boring about it. And we're learning, and you've mentioned this several times, we're learning so much more about what is a good model. What are the right LLMs to use? What are whether it's a certain way of doing it, whether you train your own model, whether you pick up models from some of the bigger organizations. There's so much money in it. There's so much investment in it. There's so much happening in it that in a moment, the things we've done are going to look silly
Yeah.
because we're going to be like, yeah, that was great, but that was yesterday. Like you mentioned before, even like compliance changes at a moment's notice,
Yes.
the bad actors change. And a lot of those bad actors are using this really leading edge stuff, not the stuff it's been around for a little bit. So do you worry a little bit about how that pace of change is kind of literally overtaking everything right now?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly do, but I do think that the pace of change and the technology available to us are moving at a similar pace.
Okay.
So that's the one thing that makes me feel a little bit more comfortable, because, as I said before, the minute you have a better mousetrap, you're going to have a smarter mouse.
Right.
But we have the technology now to really keep an eye on that and make sure that as our mice are evolving, we have the ability to use technology to try and trap them. So,
Yeah.
I can't tell you that it'll always be that way, but right now it feels like it's that way. And I think, my recommendation to your listeners in the talent acquisition space would be, when you're talking to any vendor, and especially new upstarts, make sure that you're really kicking the tires, because the AI stuff can look super, super sexy, and it is. It is super, super sexy, but they're not as focused and concerned about the compliance
Right.
aspects and the fraud aspects as the vendors who have been in the space for a while, who have larger customer bases. And so you've got to find that good balance between really cool, sexy AI and
Yeah.
capabilities, and making sure that your vendor is doing all the right things to keep you safe. Because ultimately, you want to make sure that you're getting the candidates that you want at the time that you need them, so that you can actually help your organization move in the direction that they need to.
And so now for question 3, Dara,
Okay.
I'm going to ask you to put on your prognostication hat. Let's look ahead. Where does AI governance, the next generation of hiring, how does that evolve over the next few years? And where do we need to invest and think about all this trust and efficiency stuff? How do we get there?
So I would say a couple of different pieces. I would say, first and foremost, I do think, and I've said this to a couple of people recently, that the concept of applicant tracking systems as they are currently constructed, and they've been around for 30 years, you know it, David, and I
Oh,
know
yeah.
it, 'cause we've seen them,
Yeah.
won't exist. that people are right now reimagining, and we are reimagining what hiring tech needs to be for the future. And that's not to scare people and say the recruiter's not going to exist or
Right.
any of that. That's a different conversation that I'm not worried about. It's really more about how do you transform the tech? Hiring's still going to have to happen.
Of course.
And so, how do you transform the way the workflow has happened and worked for the last 30 something years into the new way of working? So, from a prognostication perspective, I think that it's going to be less about AI bolted on. I think it's going to be more about truly being AI native from the
Right.
first line of code. So,
Right.
again, an analogy, right? I think about the world when everything was client server and
Right.
people said, well, I'm in the cloud. Wasn't
Right.
cloud back then, but I'm in the cloud. And what they really did is they took their client server application and just put it up in a
Exactly.
service center or in a data center, right?
Right.
That wasn't really web native. And then a whole crop of vendors came along that
Right.
truly were writing for being in the cloud. And so I think we're going to see that transformation happen. And I think as a part of that, governance and compliance are going to have to be written in from code from the very first line of code. And so right now, there's a lot of us that are trying to take an ATS, put the AI capabilities on top of that, and
Exactly.
then wrap it in some amount of governance. That's great right now, but it's
Right.
really kind of taking your client server solution and putting it
Exactly.
in a data center. As we go and transform, we're going to have to make sure that what we're writing from the very first line of code is AI native and focused on that, but has the governance wrapped around it. And it's probably a lot like the payroll vendors had to do from code
Exactly.
one too, because they
Yeah.
knew what they were going to be running into. So that's where I think we're going to be. That will probably include truly agentic AI, where
Yep.
you have agents that are doing things on your behalf. But as everybody says, they will be doing things on your behalf, but not without some
Exactly.
level of human oversight, because the machines are not coming to take our jobs right
Mm.
now. The machines are coming to take the inefficient parts of our jobs.
But I think the reason why that narrative speaks to a lot of people is because there's a, I don't want to say a blatant ignorance, there's a lack of understanding
Yeah.
as to what is a and where does it fit into people's workflows. Just like the same way, to your point, when we were going from client server, well, actually, let's even go back further. When we didn't have computers and everything was on paper, and they said, well, computers are going to take your jobs. No,
Yeah.
computers are going to augment and help you and become tools.
Right.
And I think that, I don't know if you remember Cy Sims from the New York metropolitan area.
Oh, yeah.
Educated consumers are our best customers, right?
Yep.
Great marketing line. And we remember this, 30, 40 years later. But it's true. As HR becomes and as candidates become more educated in the use and the tools of AI, it becomes more of a, well, why wouldn't we use that first?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think what'll happen is going back to your example of moving from paper to computers, the way the person worked evolved. And
Right.
so, what I'd like to see from a prognostication perspective is I'd like to see the traditional recruiter be a whole lot less reactive and a whole lot more proactive with AI. And so, what I mean by that, because people say sourcing is proactive, I don't think sourcing is proactive, because sourcing helps you figure out a talent pool for those positions that you already know at some point you're going to have openings for. I'm thinking more like, how do you use AI to determine what you're going to need at some point? Because of, like, one of the examples I like to use is nurses,
Mhm.
right? We know we've got an aging population in the US, right?
Yep.
So we're going to need more healthcare workers, period.
Absolutely.
We could look and see what's the enrollment at nursing schools.
Yep.
Is it going down? If it is going down, then there's going to be a shortage of supply. Then you can look at your own workforce and say, do I have an aging workforce of nurses? And then lastly, do I actually have a burnout issue?
Yeah.
Because there's stats to say, when does an emergency room nurse, as an example, start to burn out? If you had data, all those different pieces of data, and you could match that with how long does it traditionally take to hire an emergency room nurse,
Right.
then you could actually get way more proactive and say, we're going to have this problem because I can see the truck coming.
Yeah.
So I'm not necessarily hiring for a position that's going to open in a month or 2 months. I'm hiring for a crisis that I may have as a healthcare company in 6 months or 12 months time.
Yeah, but that's not even just a company's problem. That's
It is
a
not.
societal problem.
Correct.
And, your lips to God's ears here, because the problem is going to be even more dramatic. And even in that example, because it's a really phenomenal example, shifting demographics, shifting immigration policies, shifting economics, and shifting geographies. Where are people living? Where are they moving to when they retire? Where are those aging populations happening? Where are all the kids moving to? If they're moving off farms and they're going into cities, or they're going to different states, how does that change that?
Right.
And then, what's the economics of being in that role versus, to your point, the burnout of that role? So all of those. And by the way, if you have a choice between becoming a nurse or a teacher, that also changes things.
It does.
There's a lot of things here. There's a lot of economic equations here, which hopefully the workforce planning people are listening. It's all an issue, not just from your perspective as hiring technology, but it's an entire societal issue. Sorry to kind of derail your thought, but it's a beautiful thought. It's absolutely perfect, because this is a problem. And the AI needs to be able to help us on many layers and many levels, because we're not going to be able to hire people.
Right.
Because the immigration policies the way they are right now, the populations who actually take a lot of those jobs, they're not going to be here.
Not going to be here. Right. Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I think that's where AI technology can help. Number one, which we've not had the ability to access traditionally, but that's also where I think the traditional recruiter morphs or evolves into a much different type of strategic partner, because they can start thinking about those things with that data to be more proactive and evolve to be a much tighter business partner with the organization, as opposed to a separate function that is only talking about hiring once you know that you have a job open.
Exactly. Dara, I could talk about this all day, but and we might have to ask you to back on to talk about some of those deeper demographic issues, and talk about where we go from there, because I think you're a brilliant thought leader in this space. And as you can tell, we just got started.
Yeah.
So, Dara, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, David. This was so much fun. I knew it would be, because you are one of my favorite people, and I always love just chatting with you on really cool topics. So I'll come back anytime.
Oh, perfect. Great. Well, thank you very much. And thank you all for listening. Take care and stay safe. Thank you for listening to the HR Data Labs podcast. Don't forget to hit subscribe and share it with your network. You can also check out the recordings on Spotify or the HR channel, now on Roku and Fire TV. Thank you, take care, and stay safe.